I think there's the perception that pulling out of a real estate deal would only cost someone their deposit. Watch today's episode to find out why it may cost you much, much more than that. Once in a while, certain circumstances arise that cause either a buyer or a seller to pull out of a real estate deal at some point between the time where the mutual agreement happens between the buyer and the seller, which we like to call when a deal becomes firm, and the closing date, which is the date where possession of the property swaps places between the buyer and the seller. So when a deal becomes firm, the buyer must hand over a deposit to the brokerage that's representing the seller, where it's held in trust until closing date, and on that date the funds are distributed appropriately. Now, many buyers think that in order for them to pull out of a deal, all they have to do is essentially walk away from that money, forfeit the deposit, and not have it go towards the deal, obviously. Many sellers feel that in order for them to get out of a deal, all they have to do is give back that deposit to the buyers. But check this out. Here are two articles from the media, one from very recent, talking about a few deals in the Hamilton, Burlington, Oakville region, and another one in BC. You'll notice in the CBC headline, the amount the buyers had to pay, $360,000. Here's why. People who deem they have suffered damages, in this case financial, have the right to try and mitigate those damages. So if the buyers have walked away from a real estate deal, the sellers have to try and relist their home and sell again. In the case of that BC article, a buyer originally paid $1.26 million. Before closing, the buyers walked away from the deal and the sellers had to go back to market. They eventually sold for $910,000 due to a change in the market. The buyer's deposit was $60,000, so they were on the hook for the other $290,000 plus $10,000 in other costs, arriving at the $360,000 total. That's the least complicated case that could happen. Real estate transactions can sometimes be interlinked with other parties. Let's say the sellers of a home decide to be the ones to back out of a deal, preventing the buyers from moving in on closing date. What if those buyers had a home of their own that they've already sold to another party? So if their moving plans have been altered, then that would ultimately affect the plans of the people who bought their home as well. So you can start to see how real estate transactions can be daisy-chained to each other. And ultimately, whoever is responsible for creating this mess in the first place could be responsible for the damages suffered by everyone in this scenario. Now, I had a situation like this happen to me last year where I sold a personal property and the buyers of the home needed 3 different extensions to push back the closing date to almost a month later than when we had originally agreed to. Now, ultimately, I did not have any other transactions tied to the sale of my home. I hadn't purchased anything else. I didn't need the proceeds from the sale in order to move forward on another purchase or another transaction. But I don't think the buyers realized how lucky they were that I was in a position where I could grant the time extensions and not have to worry about trying to go back to market to resell maybe at a loss, and have them essentially cover the damages that I would have suffered because of those time extensions and because of the loss that I may have suffered due to subsequent transactions. So if you are a buyer or a seller and you are in the midst of moving towards your closing date and you're thinking of pulling the plug on the transaction, if you will, make sure that you speak to a professional, ideally your real estate lawyer, before you move forward so that you can get a full education on what you may be responsible for if your transaction does not close. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have been having a wonderful day, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.